Hi everybody, Matt Lawton here, and this is the Astrological Winds channel. I'm going to take a look at the astrological weather report for the week of March 24th through 30th. Another really busy and significant week astrologically. Not only do we have the second eclipse of the eclipse season with a new moon at 9 degrees Aries, but we have one of pretty much what I consider the biggest shift of the year with Neptune going into Aries next weekend, also, which I talked about extensively in the annual blog at the beginning of January. So I'm not going to get back into it here because there's too many other things going on. And also, Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde continue to travel together, and both will go back into Pisces this week and conjunct Neptune right away. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this week. First off, just a little business. And, you can hit fast forward now if you don't want to hear the infomercial. The Astrological Weathers channel is a free video blog I've been doing on YouTube for years now. If you have a YouTube account and you like what you're seeing, I'd really love you to become a follower. And don't forget to turn the notifications on. That's really important, or you won't know when the blog is posted. It's also available on podcasts. It was a podcast long before it was a YouTube channel, and that frees you from having to watch video if you'd rather do it, when you're just needing to hear something at the gym, driving around. Just look up Astrological Winds channel on your favorite podcast. It's picked up by a number of them out there. If you can't find it on one, check another. You'll find it out there. Also, the Astrological Winds channel has its own Instagram page, and I post the link every week to the blog there on, so you get it on the newsreel if you become a follower there. And then the other place to always find it is on my website, www.astrologicalwinds.com. And that's also where I list all my professional services. Been a professional astrologer for over 20 years, been doing readings professionally, trained professionally for 7 years. My email, matthuey823@gmail.com. My menu is there for all my services for groups and students too. So please check that stuff out. And remember what I ask people to do. The blog is a free service. I ask you to please pass the link along every week to someone else that you know. That's the way I've gotten the blog to grow very organically with your help. If you'd like to give a donation, there's my Cash App and Venmo. No amount is too small. And remember, if you don't know astrology really well, don't get caught up on the terms. You want to listen to the interpretation. We want to be able to use this energy to, and just knowing what that energy is can help you harmonize with it and be able to be more aligned with the energy. It doesn't really matter whether you know exactly why astrologically you want to hear that, right? So, and also remember, your own chart is affecting you every week too. It's not just this energy going on in the world. Another reason to know your chart. Get a predictive reading done if you do know your chart, so that you know what's going on this year for you. So that's really important. And one of the things I just want to say this week right away, I'm going to beat, astrology's chest right now and puff up astrology right now. So, yeah, what's been going on the last few months? Is the world seemingly at the craziest place it can possibly be in our everyday life, right? It's been really stressful. And what have I been saying? Mars went retrograde in December when Mercury was retrograde. Venus is retrograde right now with Mercury retrograde at the same time. Mars is still in its shadow. The three inner planets that rule almost everything that we do every day are all being affected by retrograde. When would you expect all the normal stuff in the world to go wacko? If it was astrologically some kind of signature going on. Exactly when this stuff is happening. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I warned you guys the markets would probably collapse when Venus is in retrograde. You see that happening. Now, I just really want to show you guys how significant this is. Everybody in the world is seemingly having a really hard time right now. Leaders, countries, so much dissension within countries. people not being able to agree on anything, tragic events happening in people's lives, personally, and to people that they know, and just everything seemingly off, right? And what is the astrology saying? Everything should be off. If everything wasn't off, it would be showing us that astrology wasn't actually really working, right? So, I mean, this is really, I told you guys multiple times in the last few weeks, the last 2 weeks of March in particular would be an apex of the energy just really flying off the handle, just going literally berserko, right? And so that's what we got. And that's the world we're in right now. We have to go with it. We're all part of that. This is all made for us to use this energy as best we can, and try to make the changes that we see are best for us, for our loved ones, for society, for the world. So anyway, a lot going on this week. And I'm going to warn you right again, the biggest thing of this week is the biggest thing of the year. Neptune going into Aries next weekend on the Sunday. I am not going to talk about this. You have to go back to my annual blog, which is posted on the website. And if you don't know, if you haven't listened to the annual blog, just turn this blog off right now and go back and listen to it. Because that is really the background energy of the whole year. And it's going on all year. And this is a massive shift. This is like Pluto going into Aquarius last year. It's massive. It's going to make a major shift. And Uranus changing signs this year too. Saturn changing signs this year too. I talk all about that stuff. And so that is massive, you guys. You need to check that out if you haven't. Like I said, I'd turn this blog off now and go and check that one out and then come back to this one if you haven't yet. But I'm going to talk about this week though. And it starts on Monday today when Mercury retrograde makes its inferior conjunction to the sun, the second hit. And as I said this before, if you listened to the blog before, Mercury retrograde 3 times a year. So you might be getting used to hearing what I say about this. This inferior conjunction is the middle point of the Mercury retrograde cycle. It is when we are most interiorized. It is when communications shut down the most. It is the time when we are most seeing how the events of the last 3 months have really affected us. And so that interiorizing energy really reaches its apex, so to speak, in reviewing all these things that have gone on to us. So now it's interesting too, this energy, sun Mercury together, even when it's not retrograde, is very subjective energy, right? It's all about our own experience, and we are not very receptive during this energy. It's more about wanting to get our message out, living our own experience. And so here it is in Aries, and it's even going to make it even less receptive. That Aries energy is so much about the self, so much. And what will happen is when we do try to communicate with people, because of the subjectiveness going on, we're probably, because of the Aries energy, we're going to probably end up just getting irritated or angry at them inside ourselves, at least, because they're not really hearing us well. But we're all doing that. So it can quickly devolve, if we do end up getting into communications with people, into disagreements or arguments, right? Now, most conjunctions and Sun Mercury in particular are great seeding times to start new projects, particularly in business. But during the inferior conjunction, I tell people this is still more on the ideas, right? Not really doing anything yet. Kind of looking at what's happened the last few months again, and what do we need to restart or make a new start with. And particularly, like I said, in businesses or projects that we have going on. But this should still be happening only on an interior level again, inside, in our own thoughts. That's where the initiation should get. Because right now, like I said, we try to push stuff not only is the retrograde working against us, but the Aries energy is going to make people really defensive and kind of make us come across as being very, very coercive. Now, remember, when the Sun and Mercury together, you do have a very sharp, acute mind, right? But this really should be focused on your own inner conversation right now. You should be taking those perceptions and like really looking deeply into them and getting understanding of what that means to you. You know, it can be very, very subjective. It might not mean that same thing for anybody else, right? And this also being the middle of the Mercury retrograde, once again, being very careful about traveling during this time. And you know, impulsive stuff with Aries can make, but I've heard even in the past week some people already have given me crazy travel stories from this Mercury retrograde period. Now, what's interesting is very next day, Mercury retrograde on Tuesday, actually, I don't have it here, immediately sextiles Pluto after it does the conjunction to the sun. And to me, this is like almost a very similar energy. Now, first of all, this is going to be the second hit of Mercury sextiling Pluto during the retrograde cycle. So it's going to be 3 hits, which means to me this aspect is imprinted on the whole Mercury retrograde cycle. It's part of the whole cycle of what we're doing. And once again, you know, Mercury with Pluto is looking deeply into things, and it can be very subjective again. It can be very much like fitting of the energy of the sun conjunct Mercury in Aries. Like we can really perceive energies that are behind things. We can see the things that are driving ourselves, see the things that are driving other people, see the things that are driving just the energy of the world. So this is once again, it has the light of attention can really focus on the interior, can get very, very deep and down into finding the what's driving everything. Now, one of the things I want to say too is this is once again really good energy for research too, like taking that Mercury retrograde interior energy, taking the Aries energy of being driven to find out something, and then taking this Pluto energy and really looking deeply into things, you know, and really getting a chance at seeing why we have certain viewpoints, why we're so strongly attached to them, not only ourselves, but others too. And, you know, when Mercury is with Pluto like this, even in a sextile, we can be very married to our opinions and beliefs, and we can really strongly want to push them out. And remember, that's not going to be really very easy to do with Mercury retrograde. You're going to get resistance. So, once again, it's best to do this interiorly. Challenge yourself first. Where is this energy going from? I really think during this Mercury retrograde, with this going on too, we're all going through some kind of intellectual transformation. We're really seeing where some of our energy is being driven, and we're processing and integrating this on a very deep level, which is an excellent, excellent use for Mercury retrograde period. So I think the Mercury Pluto sextile is going to work very well with the Mercury retrograde if you can focus those two energies together into that interiorizing and getting a better understanding of how things are working and the patterns of things. Now, on Wednesday, and I don't have it here either, is Mars squaring Chiron. And in the larger Mars retrograde cycle, which started way, way back in November, actually, when it was going into shadow. And then, you know, December 5th of last year was when Mars went retrograde. And Mars has been retrograding Cancer, one of its weakest signs. This is actually the third hit of Mars square Chiron. And I will make this comment right away. Elon Musk is a great example of what happens with Mars retrograding and overreacting to things, and this Mars square Chiron now. The Mars square Chiron really is about new parts of us coming out, new parts of our energy, our personality, our life force coming out, and it's out of balance. But it's also very like assertive or aggressive about wanting to state this new part of ourselves. So it can really create a lot of conflict because it's not integrated yet fully into our personality, yet we're already pushing that part of ourselves out. So I think Elon has really shown us a really good example of that in the last few months of like, you know, all of a sudden being very involved in politics, pushing some stuff out. And now what has happened now? It's boomerang back. His big company is like losing half its value. His wealth is going down by the day. He doesn't seem to notice that every time he opens his mouth, he's just hurting himself, injuring himself. That's what this Mars square Chiron is all about, and this new part of this personality is coming out of us, trying to figure out how to emerge and integrate itself with the rest of us. And the rest of us is like, whoa, this new part of us is really out of balance, and I really don't have complete control of this. Now, the other thing with Mars Chiron is being careful once again of physical injuries, of being too impulsive with our actions and getting ourselves hurt, getting ourselves weakened somehow so that we're open for illness. So like I said, we have to be really careful on this one. Now, look, it is tied into the Mars retrograde cycle. And a lot of us have made decisions during this cycle, especially with Mars in Cancer, that may be right now coming back to bite us. Decisions that were impulsive or aggressive, that came out of a place of fear, that came out of a place of not having enough for ourselves or our loved ones. And now all of a sudden, it's coming back. And this is a time when it can really bite us. And Thursday is the day that Venus will lead the charge back into Pisces, the two of them still traveling together, Mercury and Venus. So Venus goes back into Pisces and conjuncts Neptune on Thursday. So Venus is actually happy in Pisces. This is the sign that Venus is exalted in, and this is where she can be her most creative, and connecting to Neptune immediately, which is the co-ruler of Pisces. So very idealistic about love and relationships. On a bigger level, this can bring in very much lots of compassion, unconditional love, very idealistic about our love. And it can be out of touch with reality for sure. We are very willing to help people out right now. And on a personal level, we really have to be careful with this because we can live in some kind of romantic daydream and believe that somehow it's all going to come true, with fairies and unicorns and stuff. But with Venus retrograde, this may actually just be an old pattern that we're still not aware of, that we're out of touch with, that we think, there's some soulmate or soul union that's this perfect person and they're going to meet all our ideals and everything. And this can really set us up for disappointment, in this way. So it may be that we're still trying to learn some lessons that, that's not the way that relationships work. But this is really excellent energy for sparking up that creative side of Venus, the artistic side. It may be just envisioning right now, especially with the Pisces energy, because the Pisces energy can see the bigger vision and it's very abstract. So we may not actually do stuff physically, create stuff with it yet, but we may actually start to get a really great vision of what we want to create. Now, this is also a time where we can also look for spiritual connections, like we're almost looking for a guru or a teacher. And we have to remember we're very open and receptive with the Venus, Neptune, Venus Pisces, so we can be easily misled. We can deceive ourselves, or we can be set up for being deceived very easily by others because they're somehow appealing to an ideal. So this can really set up disappointment once again. That's one of the biggest issues with Venus Neptune, is that, once we realize people can't live up to those ideals we have, then we get very, very disappointed because we're not being very discerning with this energy initially. We're holding on to hope a little too much, holding on to some pattern or dream or fantasy that we might have learned, the happily ever after or something like that. And so now the retrograde may be bringing this all back for us to see this now. That are we dealing well with reality? And this really, I'll tell you, with Venus Neptune, really what we may do, a lot of us, is just kind of shut down and interiorize again, try to find a place where we can be quiet and process and integrate a lot of the stuff that's going on. And that would actually be really helpful. And relationships can help us be more real with ourselves. It can give us a better understanding of our own self and how we're operating. So, once again, like I said, very interesting energy, and it can be very useful, but we have to be very careful about misleading ourselves or allowing ourselves to be misled. All right, the big event of the week, the second eclipse of our first eclipse season of this year. And it's a new moon in Aries at 9 degrees and is a solar eclipse. And so, new moons are seeding time. So look where that 9 degrees Aries is in your chart, the house that it's in. That's the area of life where we can start new things up, new beginnings, new projects. Now, Aries is also the beginning of the zodiac. So it's a particularly potent new moon. Not only are we starting a new moon cycle, but we're starting a whole new solar cycle too, right? So that's and one of the things that's interesting about this new moon too is that it doesn't make any other exact aspects, major aspects to any of the planets. So it's a very pure Aries driven energy. Now, the problem, of course, that it's going to run into right away is that both Mercury and Venus are retrograde, and Mars, its ruler, is in a very weak sign of Cancer and is also still in the shadow of its retrograde. And because Aries wants to push forward and really, take action, take initiative, this can be very, very frustrating, very, very irritating, upsetting, even angering to get, not be able to do that, or not, or when you do it, not have the world reacting in the ways that you normally would expect it to. But, Aries new moon is looking for a new challenge. It's looking for a new adventure. That's how it's going to satisfy its emotions, and even if that means getting into conflict, that's okay, as long as it's something that's, some kind of new thing that it can really jump on. But the problem is we can be way, way too impulsive with our energy. And really, it's our own actions that can mess us up. And once again, when you look at all the retrograde energy, that's going to feed into that. We have to be really careful too. When we do get impatient with people with Aries energy, we can get very, very aggressive. We can get very, very angry towards them, even start arguments, fights, battles, things like that. It is a very high spirited energy, and it can be very enthusiastic and courageous and willing to take risks that we normally would not. But a lot of this stuff we have to be really careful about right away, feeling threatened or blocked or somehow frustrated by the retrograde energy, or the fact that Mars is in Cancer still, where it can be extra defensive. Mars is the ruler of this new moon. So it's very important to know what Mars is doing. And in Cancer, it is feeling very defensive because Mars in Cancer doesn't feel like its basic needs are being met well. And same for the things with its loved ones. So it can be when it's angry, it can really overreact and really mess ourselves up. It can explode. And remember, the Mars is what doing right now? I just talked about on Wednesday. It's squaring Chiron. So the potential for for allowing ourselves to explode and hurt ourselves is very, very real. It's something that we can easily do and mess ourselves up. Now, what's interesting too, though, is Mars is trining Saturn. Okay, I talked about this last week. So Mars is still trining Saturn. And that's showing, if we're going to have success with our actions right now, they have to be very well thought out. They have to be taken step by step. We have to discipline the Aries energy. We have to lasso that energy in. It is very, very hard for Aries to bring that in. But if we can focus that energy and concentrate it down, we can really bring in some stability and success. And once we do that, it starts to bring up our confidence. And when we, and that can show us that yes, even in these hardest of times, when all this crazy retrograde energy is going on and there's major shifts going on in the world, that we still have the persistence, we still have the endurance to get through the hardest of times. So, step by step is what we want to do. Discipline this wild energy before you move on to one thing. Make sure you've got it solid underneath. And otherwise, we're just going to end up hurting ourselves over and over, getting very angry and irritated and kind of like banging our head against the wall, really. Now, remember, this is an eclipse too, and it's a solar eclipse. And many times, solar eclipses mean that there's big events that will happen in the world that are going to affect many, many people. It can be full countries, it can be large populations, it can be a natural disaster, it can be man-made disasters. Um, Eclipses bring in changes that are irrevocable. Once they change the path of your life and put it onto a new place. And many times, especially with solar eclipses, they can be large events that just change the whole course of a large group of people, and all those individuals' lives are being affected too. But look at your chart. If you have any planets in the 8, 9, or 10 degree zone of cardinal signs, that's Aries, right? And Libra, right? And cardinal signs, Capricorn, right? And Cancer. If you have planets in the 8, 9, 10 degrees, you're probably going to get hit by this new moon and eclipse harder than other people are. And it could bring some event in your life that's an irrevocable change. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but it really can change our lives in very big ways. So this eclipse was originally born at Saros Series North, number 9. It was originally born on August 21st of 1664. So it's a pretty young eclipse still. They last for 1800 years. So this one's only gone about 400 years now. And that's why it's only a partial eclipse, why it's a pretty wide one still. But if you look at the chart of the original birth chart of this eclipse, there's a lot of physical energy involved, which, once again, Aries energy, right? Lots of physical energy. But it's the energy that you can push ahead and get a lot of stuff done. But it's actually saying the same thing that all this other stuff has said. If you push too hard and too fast, impulsively, you are going to get yourself in an accident, or some kind of incident is going to occur that you're going to regret from being too impulsive. So we have to be really careful with this energy. It's a good energy to delve into new things, but we have to be really careful about how we measure that energy out. If we get too impulsive, it is going to hurt us. There's no doubt that it can bring in a lot of sudden changes. So you really want to look where this eclipse is in your chart in this new moon. And that's the area of life where you can expect some changes. And if you have planets in that 8, 9, 10 degree zone, a cardinal signs, these changes that come with this eclipse can be very, very, life altering. And like I said, it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be both. Really depends on how we judge things. Now, also on Saturday is the day Mercury retrograde goes back into Pisces and conjuncts Neptune also. And so, unlike Venus, Mercury does not like Pisces at all. In fact, it's the weakest sign for Mercury to be in. It's in fall and detriment, and being conjunct Neptune at the same time means this can bring a lot of confusion to the mind. Not clear what we should do. Really kind of spinning out on knowing that, there's a lot of like issues going on and not being really clear about what to do about them. And so like we may fall into patterns of escapism is what happens with this. I mean, it does give a very creative mind, the Mercury Neptune, and once again, for people who are artistic, especially with words, this is an excellent time. But our minds are very much under the influence of our emotions now, and therefore that will once again feed the difficulties of trying to communicate during a Mercury retrograde, when you can't, people can't quite really feel how you ever feel, so like they can try to get an understanding, but like it really can feed the miscommunications and the shutdown communications. It's very difficult. I'm very sensitive to others' emotions in the environment, but it's very hard to put that into words. Our mind is very much into escaping now, and going into a fantasy world that's very disconnected from reality, and therefore it makes it harder to communicate with others, and to do the Mercury things in life. We have to be very careful about self-deluding ourselves once again, not being very clear, being too idealistic and not being in touch with reality, and therefore very hard to connect with others, very hard to understand what's going on and what we should do. Definitely not a time to be making any kinds of solid agreements or trying to start new things. Once again, this shows you that everything will be really off. It's really, this week is really a time where interiorizing our minds is the best thing to do, interiorizing our emotions, trying to look back on all these things that have been going on the last few months, and getting a better understanding of the bigger patterns of them and how our lives fit in, and just trying to like find a way that we can break away from a lot of that wilder energy and just find a space to contemplate and meditate in a quieter place and be able to process a lot of this stuff. So I think the whole week, with the two retrogrades and the energy of the Mars bringing down the new moon, and the Neptune energy and the Pisces energy, all saying, it's a great time to just try to find a space, sacred space, either within yourself or outside, where you can try to contemplate and integrate and begin to understand some of this stuff that's going on. Now, like I said, Sunday, biggest change of the year, Neptune going into Aries. It will go retrograde at 2 degrees of Aries on July 4th, and will actually go back into Pisces next October, the 23rd, for about 3 months until January of next year. So we will get one last little dip in Pisces. But I will say this right now, I talked about it a lot. I can't go into this. I could talk about this for a half an hour. Neptune going into Aries. You need to go back to my annual blog. But I will say this, like I said, Neptune's a troublemaker. It's been, mythologically, it can create a lot of trouble in the world of humans. It can start wars and things like that. It rules liquids like oils and water, and it's going into Aries, where people get very, very aggressive about what they believe in. And Neptune is all about our ideals and what we believe in. So the last 15 years, there's been a huge split in the world about how different groups view the way things should go according to their belief systems. When Neptune goes into Aries, people get very aggressive about pushing their belief systems and ideals onto one another. It gets very much more warlike. So A lot of changes going on, and the world, is not a peaceful place right now. And there's a lot of dissension. There's a lot of um, separation. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of division. And Neptune and Aries will feed that. If we're not aware of that, this can get people hell bent on pushing their ideals down the throats of others, to be a conqueror, to push their morals, their values, their ideals. So this is very dangerous energy for the world, especially in the state that we're in now. It can bring the world to great, great conflict. And the world's already in a lot of conflict. So have to be careful, but go back to that annual blog to find the real details of that stuff. All right, this is Matt Lawton. This is the Astrological Winds channel. This is a free video blog. You are going to pass the link along for me right now to someone else in return for this service. If you'd like to give a donation to the blog, my Cash App is $Matthew with 2 T's, Lawton, Lauten, Venmo at Matthew-Lawton, Lauten. No amount is too small, even $5. It does actually cost me some money to put the blog out every month. And, if you've been getting a little help from it and you can kick me a little bit, I appreciate that. The best way to support me is I am a professional astrologer. And on my website, www.astrologicalwinds.com, is a menu of all the types of readings I give. There's many different types: natal readings, there's predictive for the next year, fixed star for deep soul purpose, relationships, children's, elections. There's so many of them. Take a look. I've been doing readings professionally for 3 years now. Was trained and took classes and passed exams for 7 years to do that. I would really love to do your chart. If you have an interest in astrology, you haven't had your chart done by a professional astrologer yet, it's going to be a completely different experience than you trying to figure it out, or a friend trying to figure it out with a book, or even a computer printout. You don't get the holistic view. So you want to do that, your chart is with you your whole life. It never leaves you. So, it's like, we spend a lot of money on a lot of things that leave us right away. This is something, that self-knowledge, that can help you in your life become more self-fulfilled, more self-empowered. So I highly recommend you do that. And if you have a group and you're looking for a speaker, a lecture, a workshop, mini readings, I also do all that stuff. Take a look at the website. I'm also forming a beginner's astrology student class right now. We're going to probably try to do a live one, probably after the retrogrades. Definitely don't want to start that during a retrograde. So if you're interested in that, let me know. There are student classes available on podcasts too. Thank you all so much. Please pass the blog along. Next week, I will not only be doing the weekly, but I'll also be doing the monthly for April. So you'll want to be around to check that one out too. And I know we are going to get the big, what I consider really the biggest aspect of the year between the outer planets, the Saturn sextile Uranus is going to be in April. So that, maybe will give us some opportunities to bring change into our systems and start to rewrite them. All right, I will see you all next week. Like I said, I know it's been a tough world this year. I know it's particularly peaking right now, and it's just showing us, yes, the astrology works. We need to work with it. We can work with it and use it to the best of our advantage. So hopefully you are able to do that a little bit better this week now. I'll see you all next week.